Hey everyone, it's Tiberius here. I'm the developer of the AutoRecon tool for enumeration. I originally developed it while doing the OSCP labs, and then subsequently I used it on the exam. It's a pretty cool tool, I think. So what it does is it performs some port scans with service detection, and then from those results, it extracts the names of the services that it finds, and based on a config file it has, it will start new scans with other tools to try and get the most amount of automated enumeration you can, so that by the time the tool finishes, you should have a lot of information that you can just scroll through, and then hopefully that will indicate something that you want to investigate further. And it also gives a bunch of manual commands that you may want to run. And they're not run automatically because generally that speaking they're kind of finicky, and they may not be useful in every single situation. But a lot of the questions that I get regarding the tool are mostly about how do I install it. I understand the documentation for AutoRecon is quite complicated, and there's a number of ways to install it. So what I figured we'd do today is go over how to install AutoRecon on the latest Kali, and basically then sort of go over how to use it, and also how to sort of edit the config files if you need to. So there's a few ways of installing it. Like I've said, there is this quick install using Docker if you don't have Kali, but I didn't do any of this. This was a third party who coded this in. So if you haven't got Kali, apparently this is a good way of doing it. However, we do have Kali, and obviously Kali is recommended for doing the exam. So there are a few requirements that we need first. AutoRecon is a Python 3 tool. It won't run on Python 2. It's actually, specifically, I think it's Python 3.8 and above, because it uses a library called asyncio, and I don't think that's supported in earlier versions. So that needs to be installed. You'll also need to install Python 3's version of pip, just so you can install some extra packages. And for pipx, which is a great way of installing it, you need that too. So let's just make sure that Python 3 is up to date. So what we're going to do is we'll copy this and run it there. And hopefully this should basically just download the latest Python 3, make sure everything is up to date. Shouldn't take too long. Okay, perfect. The next thing we want to do is install Python 3 pip. So this will let us install some libraries that AutoRecon requires. So we'll do that. That should take even less time. And there we go. So this section doesn't really apply anymore. This was for when you were using the OSCP distribution of Kali, which was a 32-bit system. Sometimes getting Python 3 with pip to work was a nightmare. So you had to do it like this. So you really shouldn't have to do this anymore. Pip 3 should work fine. So we are going to install it using pipx, among other things. So we need to make sure that the environment is set up for pipx, which means we need to install Python 3 venv. So we'll do that now. Okay, that's installed. And now we're just going to install pipx just as the local user. So here we go. Okay, that's all installed. And finally, we need to run pipx with this ensure path, just so that the pipx binary gets added to our path properly. And if we run that, it should say, yep, it added it to a path. You may need to open a new terminal or re-log in for this path to change. So let's do that. Let's just open a new tab right here. Now, sometimes I think people get confused by all of this. This is just extra stuff for pipx if you want to run AutoRecon with sudo, which obviously most of the time you do because you want the mmap scans to be using syn scans instead of connect scans, and you also want the UDP scans to work because obviously For mmap UDP to work, you need to be running it as root. So this is basically a few ways of doing this. I personally just use this one, but you can use any of these, and you can also, add some aliases or update the sudoers. We're not going to go into that though. So we need to install supporting packages. So AutoRecon uses the seclists archive for a few of the tools that it runs. So let's install that. And that's going to take a while because it's 386 megabytes. So while we're doing that, what we'll do is install these tools. And these are actually the programs that AutoRecon runs based off of the original mmap scans. So let's copy this long string here. And what we'll do is we'll go back to the initial terminal, and I'll just paste that in there. And, okay, yeah, it's not gonna, can't install two things at once. Okay, so we'll wait for this to unpack. That's working, all right, fine. Let's paste it here. And that shouldn't take too long to install either. There we go, perfect. Okay, so we're done with the requirements. So the next section is obviously installation. So there's three main ways of installing AutoRecon. You can use pipx, you can just use pip, or you can do it manually. So let's use pipx first. So what we need to do in our new terminal, because this is where pipx actually is in the path, we're just going to paste this. And you'll see pipx will do its magic. And now it's installing AutoRecon. And hopefully after this, we should just be able to run AutoRecon. Yep, and it'll give us the error message. So we can run AutoRecon-H for the help text. And now AutoRecon's installed. So that was pretty simple, right? So if you do want to run it with sudo, let's scroll back up. You just need to copy this, and we'll paste it in there. And you see we get that same error again. If you didn't do that and you tried to run AutoRecon through sudo, it would say command not found. So that's just a nice way of doing it. And obviously you want to do that because of the mmap scans, the initial ones anyway. Okay. So let's uninstall using pipx. So we can just, I think actually just do pipx uninstall AutoRecon. There we go, it's uninstalled. And that's just so we can install it now using pip. So if we do this now, and obviously if you're installing using pip, you need to run the installation command as root or with sudo in order to be able to run AutoRecon using sudo. Okay, so we'll paste that in there, and this should run that command, and hopefully at the end of this we should get the ability to run sudo AutoRecon, and there we go, we do. Okay, and obviously this way I don't think you can run, oh maybe you can run AutoRecon, you can, okay. So you can run AutoRecon either way, you just have to install it using sudo. Okay, so again, let's uninstall that. So I think we need to do just pip uninstall AutoRecon. Yep, remove all those. Perfect. All right, so we've now uninstalled AutoRecon. So the next way is manually. The manual way, what you'll need to do is clone the repo. So you just need to git clone, and then literally just the URL of your AutoRecon will work. So it clones into a directory called AutoRecon. Then you need to go into source, and then you need to go into AutoRecon. Okay. And now what you need to do, you need to run Python 3, basically with pip install, and then the requirements file, which actually in this case is actually up 2 levels. So really, if you go into the AutoRecon directory here, there's the requirements file. So we'll do that. Requirements. So it's basically already been satisfied. Everything's been installed already. That's fine. And now what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to run python AutoRecon.py. from the actual directory where we were before. So in source AutoRecon, if we paste this, and we get this error message again. Okay, and I think you also should be able to run sudo. Yep, so that works with sudo as well. Okay, so that's the three main ways of installing AutoRecon. Using pipx, which obviously I think works best, and then if you just want to use pip, and finally if you prefer actually downloading it. Downloading it means it's just easier to edit the config files as well, because you know exactly where they are. You don't have to go hunt for them. So I usually install it manually. Just gives me a better sense of control. Okay, let's talk about usage of AutoRecon. As you can see, there's quite a lot of different options, but to be honest with you, most of these you can just leave as the default, especially if you're doing OSCP labs or exams. The key thing to remember really is obviously the only argument you actually need is the targets argument, and this is a space-separated list of either IP addresses or CIDR notation, like for instance the /24, or even resolvable host names that you want to scan. Okay, you can also add or create a file with the targets in, one per new line. Again, as either an IP address or notation or a host name, as long as it's one per line, and then reference that target file using -t. By default, AutoRecon will scan 5 target hosts at the same time, so you can change that number though with the CT. However, most of the time you don't need to do that, especially on the exam when honestly you only need to scan 4 hosts at once, because obviously one of them is the buffer overflow. You don't really need to change this value. And the other thing that you might want to look at is the CS, which is concurrent scans. So concurrent targets is basically the number of different hosts you're scanning at once. Concurrent scans is the number of scans per target. So for instance, each target host, when it starts scanning, is going to have at least 3 Nmap scans running, basically a full TCP, a top 1000 TCP, and a top 20 UDP. If you were to set this 10 to something like 2, then it would only run 2 of those Nmap scans at once, and then once one finished, it would run the other one. Usually I kept this at 10 because once those Nmap scans are done, they're going to return hopefully a large number of services that they found, and that's going to trigger a lot of actual other scans to take place, and you probably want to keep it at 10. So really, at the a worst possible scenario, the maximum number of concurrent things that AutoRecon is doing in terms of scanning is going to be 50, right? It's going to be 5 times 10. And obviously that will change if you change either of these numbers. But otherwise, most of this you can leave alone. We'll go into perhaps the profile option later when talking about the configuration changes, but output directory is just basically where you run it, so you can change that if you want. There's a few things about if you don't want certain directory structures, you can change that. The heartbeat, which basically is how often AutoRecon updates you on what's running. You can change that. By default, it's 60 seconds. And then these Nmap and Mmap append options are really not used that often, but you can if you want to. They're used to basically override all the Nmap scans in terms of what they're provided with. So by default, the Nmap scans all run with -VV, which is basically very verbose, with --reason, and with obviously -PN, which disables ping. So you can either replace those options with ones of your own, or you can append to them. But again, only in certain scenarios is that even worth doing. The key thing I think also to remember is that AutoRecon has different levels of verbosity. So by default, it doesn't run with anything really. It just will tell you, okay, it's kicking off a scan, and then it tells you when the scan finishes, and it gives some results. With -V, 1V, It's going to tell you more information about those scans, like it's going to give you the full command that runs. It's also going to give more information about the services that it finds. With -VV, which I do not recommend you run, it's going to take all of the output of all the scans that are currently going on and display them at the same time. And as you can imagine, since this is a multi-threaded scanner, you could be getting basically 50 scan results all interlaced into each other, which is not good. But let's go ahead and do a scan with AutoRecon. Use sudo python 3 AutoRecon. Oh, here we go. I'm just going to scan two things. So basically the same thing twice, right? 127.0.0.1 is localhost, but I'll also give localhost there. You'll get these deprecation warnings. I have to fix this before Python 3.1, I guess. Sorry, 3.11. But you see that didn't take that long because obviously, this box doesn't have much installed on it and it's local, so there's no real lag. So it finished in 5 seconds. If we rerun that actually and put -v in there, actually, you know what I'll do? I'll remove the results directory and then we'll run it with -v just to show you what happens. So you'll see it says running service detection, and this is the entire command it ran, right? So you can, if you want to, copy paste and run that again. And if we, I guess, what we'll do again, remove the results and run it with VV, which I do not recommend, it's going to do this. It's going to basically spit out all of the Nmap results at once. So that's fun. So in terms of reading results, though, what I recommend, there's this results directory, which obviously has the 2 separate targets that we listed. And then in each of those, there's some directories that you are really crafted for like the exam. So the exploit directory is the idea behind it was, you put your exploit there for the exam. The loot would be anything that you grabbed off the host machine. Report would be, any notes that you were going to write for the report. But really, scans is what you want to look at. And so there's a few things that will happen in scans. The commands.log will literally just be a log of all the commands that AutoRecon ran. And then you have the actual results. So you've got the full TCP Mmap, the quick TCP Mmap, and the top 20 UDP. And then you also have this XML directory, which has XML output for those Mmap scans. But I don't really like reading it this way. What I like to do is I like to install Atom and go to the project view, go into the source, and then just click results here. Click OK. Cancel that. Okay, hang on. Let's just do that. Okay. And now we have the results folder. We have 2 different hosts that we scanned. We can click into the scans folder, and then we can just click, and it'll preview. So it doesn't actually fully open the file, because if I click here, it's just going to get replaced. So I like this because you can just basically click through and read absolutely everything. And you can see basically this box has nothing on it. So there was nothing really done. So you'll just get these Mmap scans. Obviously, if there was an HTTP server, for instance, you'd have a lot more content here you could click through. You'd also have the manual commands file, which again gives an idea of, it gives some extra commands you might want to run manually. You don't have to. In some situations, it makes no sense, but it's basically AutoRecon's way of saying, I didn't run these commands because I didn't think they're very good to run automatically and I don't have any context, but you might want to yourself. So a lot of the brute force commands are in there. I didn't want to write AutoRecon so it would just go off and brute force everything. So that's why that command exists. And there should also be an errors log if there are any commands that fail. And then you can just rerun them and see what the error message was. Okay, so let's just quickly cover the AutoRecon config. So what I've done, I've added the main AutoRecon directory as a project in Atom. And as you can see, there's this config folder. And this has 3 toml files. Now, toml is this minimal language really. So it's kind of like a configuration file language that is almost like a markup language as well. So the idea is it's supposed to be easy to read. So that's why I chose it. So let's go back and see this global patterns default. So patterns are things that you can define for certain commands, or you can do these global patterns. And really what they are is AutoRecon, when it gets output back from a command, it's going to run it through these patterns. And if one of the pattern matches, it's going to output the description. Okay. So in this case, we have a pattern which is generally used for mmap scans, because mmap, when it runs certain scripts, if it finds something that's vulnerable, it usually puts this state field with then either likely vulnerable or vulnerable. And so if when scanning using nmap, any of the nmap commands comes back with a line that matches this pattern, then AutoRecon is going to spit out this, and it's also going to include the match. Also, I have another match here which just checks for the word unauthorized, and it doesn't do a case sensitive check. So it should be any like spelling of unauthorized using uppercase, lowercase, or a mixture. And that's generally useful for finding stuff like perhaps FTP servers that allow you to just connect anonymously, or HTTP logins that you can access unauthorized. So there's just two basic ones, and you can add to them here. You can see the syntax is pretty simple. Just define a pattern, tag here, and then the actual pattern itself, and then description if you want to. If you don't leave a description, it's just going to basically say, oh, I found this pattern. So let's open the port scan profiles TOML file. So port scan profile is effectively how AutoRecon starts the initial enumeration. So to properly enumerate services, you obviously have to port scan them, and then you have to run service detection to get the list of services running on those ports. Now, for mmap, you can do that all as one command, because you can just tell it SV, which will just go off and do version scanning and try and enumerate the services. But for instance, unicorn scan, you may have to do it differently. So this config file contains three different profiles. One is called default, one is called quick, and one is called UDP. The default one obviously is the one that runs by default. And if you remember when we were talking about user options, this profile here is how you specify which profile you want. So if you don't specify any profile, it's just going to default to the default profile. And as you can see, this has three different scans. One is called mmap quick, one is called mmap full TCP, and one is called mmap top 20 UDP. And the way this one works is this just runs the top 1,000 TCP ports with a service scan. And the pattern here it looks confusing, but really it's basically just matching when a port is open and determining what service that mmap detected. You shouldn't need to change any of this, and you can honestly just copy this for a lot of config files if you want to change any of this. The full TCP command is exactly the same. It just obviously scans all ports, which is what this does, -p-. So all the TCP ports. It also does some OS scanning, etc. And I think, yeah, it runs -a, so it's going to run basically almost everything, like scripts and stuff. And again, it uses this pattern to determine what ports are open and what services those are. And finally, obviously, it runs the top 20p UDP, which basically identical, right? It just runs SU for UDP, and it runs the top 20 ports instead. So there are a few others. So the quick mmap, so the quick profile should just run, I believe, the top 1,000 TCP and the top 20 UDP. So it doesn't do a full TCP port scan. Again, you might need that at some point. And the UDP only runs the top UDP ports, but it does it in a different way. And this was just to show how you can configure this differently. So you'll notice for all of these, we had a service detection at the end of these. And in here, what we have is port scan and service detection. If you just give AutoRecon a service detection command, it's going to assume that this command here will know what ports will it be able to extract ports as well. So it's basically a 2-in-1 command. If you want to run a port scan first and then pass a list of ports to another command that does the service detection, this is what you can do. So in this case, what we're doing is we've defined this port scan, which uses unicorn scan, and you give it this list of ports here. And then this pattern matches just the port numbers. Okay. And then you want a service detection scan here, which just goes back to mmap, and it uses this special variable. So what AutoRecon does is it takes this list of ports here and basically converts it to a comma-separated list, which you can just stick in using this ports command. And then, this pattern is exactly the same. Again, if you're confused by any of this, don't worry. You rarely have to change anything. I would say almost never would have to change anything about this. I'm just trying to, explain how this all works. But really, the best file that you might want to change configs of is the service scans file. So the service scans file defines all the different types of services that AutoRecon can detect and then do enumeration scans on. So it has a few configurable variables which you can change if you want to. If you want a different username word list or password word list, you can change those. Those are for the brute force commands, which again are manual, but you usually can just ignore those. There's this special all services tag, which basically defines if you want a scan to run regardless of the service that's detected, then you should stick your scan here. So what it does, each tag has a service-names field, which is an array of regex expressions, regular expressions that match the name of the service. So in this case, we're matching everything, right? So a dot is any character, and a plus is basically one or more of that character. So that will match all service names. And then what you do is you define a scan here, and this name of the scan is SSL scan. So effectively, what I determined is, well, SSL can be configured really on any port. So you probably want to do an SSL scan on every single port that you come across. However, AutoRecon has some logic in it where it knows whether the port detects the port is configured to use SSL or not, and so this if statement here basically prevents SSL scan from actually running if the port isn't configured to use SSL. Again, you don't need to know why or really any of that, but really if you wanted to add a new scan to the all services scan, this is how you would do it. So you would just create a new all services.scan object there, and then you would give it a name. So obviously it has to be different, so we'll just do blah, and then a command. And then you can put whatever you want in there. And remember, you get access to the address, which is obviously the IP address of the target and the port. And you can also get access to like the scan directory for if you want to output it to the actual scan directory itself. So there's a few things you can do there. Let's delete that. But really, we want to go down and see all these different versions. So there's a lot of stuff here. But basically, these are all the different services that AutoRecon can detect and scan. A lot of them just do mmap scans. But for instance, if you detect a DNS server, so that matches the word domain, you can run an mmap DNS scan. If you detect FTP, and obviously there's two different patterns for detecting FTP. Then a few things happen. Scroll down a bit more. So the first thing is an Nmap FTP scan. So basically running some scripts where FTP is in the script name. And in this specific scan, there's a scan pattern defined. So this pattern will only get matched if this command is running. And that's to check whether anonymous FTP is enabled. Okay. And then we have these things, manuals. So you'll notice how this was ftp.scan, and a scan is automatic. These manual commands are manual commands, right? So they go in the manual_commands.txt file if FTP is detected. So if after the port scan finishes, AutoRecon finds that FTP is enabled, what it's going to do is it's going to launch this Nmap FTP scan, and it's also going to write these two commands to the manual_commands.txt file. And it's going to obviously replace these placeholders, these variables, with valid variables. So in this case, username word list and password word list were the two variables that are defined at the top of this file. Port is whatever port the FTP was found on this host. And then obviously there's the scan directory. It's going to create like a file name based on the protocol. So in this case, FTP. The port number, which again is probably going to be 21, right? But it could be anything. And then finally, obviously, the last thing you pass to Hydra is the actual address, which is ftp:// and then the actual address, which is going to be the IP or the host name that was that's of the target. Okay, it does the same thing with Medusa in case you want to use Medusa. So let's scroll down. The HTTP scan is obviously the biggest one because it has so many different things that run. And this is actually where ignore service names comes in. So if you want to match certain service names but ignore others, because obviously you want to match where HTTP is, but HTTP is included in this, and I believe this was not an HTTP server, or it wasn't something you actually want to scan using any of these, you can define these ignored service names, which is just another thing you can do. And again, here's Nmap HTTP. It defines an Nmap scan. There's a couple of patterns there that are interesting. So it identifies the HTTP server, or it says that WebDAV's enabled. There's a few others. So it's going to curl the robots file. It's going to run WhatWeb. It's going to run Nikto. It's going to run GoBuster. And again, here we go. Here's some manual commands. And you can define these manual commands in groups, by the way. So in this case, this was a set of manual commands related to dir search. And again, here's another set of manual commands related to dirb. And then GoBuster v3 and GoBuster version 1 and 2, because obviously those commands all use different syntax. So you can really just, add as many manual commands as you want, and you can put them in the same group as another group, or you can just, scroll to the end and just, type one here, right? So do http.manual description equals new command, and then commands equals, and obviously these are arrays because the idea is you want to put several commands in, but you can just put one, and yeah, you can put any command in there you want. So that's how you modify this. It's obviously a bit daunting at first, but I hope if you read through and have a look at what AutoRecon's doing, this becomes slightly more obvious. It definitely, I think, is a nice way of doing it, even though it is complicated. It gives a lot of control back to the user. So that's really the main reason I did it this way. But obviously, for like 99% of people who use AutoRecon, you do not need to touch this file at all. You should just be able to run AutoRecon and look at the output and go through it in Atom or whatever text editor you want, and hopefully look at the manual commands file, which I definitely recommend you look into, because a lot of people forget, AutoRecon doesn't do everything, and it shouldn't do everything. You don't want to automate brute forcing when it's potentially not needed, right? But brute forcing is still a big part of pen testing. It's still possibly a part of OSCP exams. So you definitely want to know those commands. But yeah, I hope this has been an informative video about firstly how to install AutoRecon, then how to run it, and then finally, if you want to get slightly more advanced, to actually configure AutoRecon or change the configuration or add to it in some way. So yeah, I hope this was a good video for everyone to watch, and that clears up some things about AutoRecon.